Hi everyone, my name is Jordan and thank you for watching my video. This is my final paper presentation and what I plan on writing my final essay on. Okay, um, so I just wanted to give a brief introduction to the project that I chose and just give a quick disclaimer. So I'm going to be talking about the recent movie We Live in Time. Um, there we go, so we can see a little bit better. That just came out. So if you are planning on watching it or interested in watching it, might want to click away because there are a lot of spoilers that are necessary for me to talk about the themes that I want to pull out of the movie into my paper. Um, and I apologize if I'm looking down. I just have a lot of notes that I want to make sure that I touch on. So yeah. Um, for those of you that might have not seen the movie, the plot follows a heteronormative white couple that live in the UK and kind of come together in this unconventional or like unique comical circumstances. For brief background, so the female protagonist is named Elmet, played by Florence Pugh, and Tobias is the male protagonist, played by Andrew Garfield. So the surface level theme of the film it's largely just about like cherishing the time that we have together and memories that we are creating with our loved ones while we're all here in the present. However, certain plot points support some of what we have been learning in class um, about how individuals find ways to persist under capitalism, even though, as we know, it's a system designed to support some and oppress most. So some things that I want to explore through the movie is just expectations of marriage and the heteronormative familial unit. So, and that kind of also goes into home ownership. And then the main thing that I want to talk about is debt. And then, as I mentioned, the movie was set in the UK. So I'm interested in looking at how the film and plot points might have been different if it were set in the United States. Okay. So the idea of assimilation into marriage is obviously intimidating for some people just because of, as we know, it has deep oppressive and patriarchal roots. And however, there are real and tangible economic, financial, social benefits associated with marriage. Even though, as we know, those benefits are not distributed equally among women, men and women, among social classes, social hierarchies, etc. So in the film, Almet and Tobias meet shortly after Tobias divorces his first partner. So like right off the bat, we're kind of seeing this like failure of the institution of marriage. And in the film, we kind of see marriage as this conflict between independence and this connection. So Almet is really hesitant to get married because she knows that she will likely be giving up her independence. Um, Scared maybe not that she's going to lose rights, like was the case however many years ago, but because of what it means to be a married woman under contemporary liberal terms. So this kind of relates to Wendy Brown's work, Liberalism and Family Values, that we read a while back. And they point out three aspects of an autonomous liberal subject. Um, the first of which is separation of civil and domestic life, which I think is where Almet was kind of hesitant about assimilation into marriage because she knew that the expectations of women as married women, as mothers, is that they are in the home, performing most of the domestic labor and are serving as homemakers. So that's, I think, where she was kind of conflicted. Um, and the second aspect is self-sufficiency. And the third is self-interest and self-orientation, which I believe that she still would have met those last two criteria just because she was a very successful and very passionate about her work as a chef, a very successful business owner, very confident, very like self-interested, I guess. So yeah. And the second theme I guess I want to touch on is the stability of homeownership versus temporality of maybe renting or other forms of finding shelter. So in the film, when Tobias and Almut first start like dating or first get together, they live in an apartment and their relationship maybe wasn't so serious and it was more temporary. Once they got married and their uh, relationship as an entity was more stable. Um, they bought a home, they bought a big house with lots of land. Um, so this kind of goes into homes not just as a means of physical means of shelter and safety, but also as entities of economic growth and independence through equity accumulation or retirement security or generational wealth and things like that. So I believe that this ties into Susan Sagert's work, Deflating the Dream, Radical Risk, and the Neoliberalization of Homeownership, because we are so socialized into thinking that homeownership is one of the only, maybe the only means of creating a safe or physically or financially stable um, place for ourselves and our families. However, countless outside pressures do not obviously always allow people to become homeowners. And the following quote that I pulled from the text, I think, explains this a lot better than I can. So I'm just going to read that off really quick. So, in the wake of neoliberal zeal to privatize everything and shift all responsibility to individuals, families faced impossible choices such as seeking medical care, buying children's shoes, paying for after-school activities, buying food, or paying the mortgage. This leaves adults and children with diminished social, emotional, and material resources. So, this kind of goes into what I was talking about previously in marriage and building a family. That obviously comes with its own financial necessities and homeownership just is onto that, but is also a means of growing economic independence. So it's kind of this double-edged sword. And then the third thing that I wanted to talk about is debt, medical and otherwise. So this is where all the spoilers are, so just be prepared. But in the movie, Helmet and Tobias struggle to conceive and require fertility treatments in order to get pregnant, which obviously come with medical associated medical costs. And in addition, Almut is re-diagnosed with cervical cancer and is faced with the decision to not seek treatment and basically have a 6-month life expectancy, or she can receive treatment and a 12-month treatment, and then it's kind of a coin toss to if it will actually work or not. And she ultimately decides to go with the treatment, go through with the treatment plan, and um, Tobias, her husband, urges her to stop working, to make more time and energy to get better, which I think is what we would all want if we were diagnosed with this potentially life-ending disease. Um, so because of the UK's healthcare system, she was able to take time off of work without the immediate and intense financial pressure that accompanies a diagnosis such as cancer, which is obviously both um, like mentally and financially and physically devastating for so many families in the United States. So Almut fears that leaving her daughter behind with nothing to show for her life. So she decides to compete in, and I apologize for my pronunciation, but it's Bocuse d'Or, which is essentially the Olympic Games for cooking. And again, because she's maybe not feeling the financial pressure to pay off medical expenses and other things, um, she's able to do that for herself and for her daughter. So she's not outwardly stressed about medical expenses or the high cost of living. And through all of this, obviously the couple is still dealing with childcare expenses and like just cost of living associated with being alive under capitalism. So, and even like the mortgage on their new home that they just bought. Um, and yeah, at the end of the movie, Helmet eventually passes away and leaves Tobias to financially support their young daughter. And so we would expect these financial challenges to be an important plot in the film, but the directors chose to omit any conversation surrounding uh, the seemingly inevitable component of debt that accompanies living under capitalism. And I was kind of interested in looking at what Tobias's life would have looked like after Almit's death. So the film ends after Amit passes away and doesn't kind of expand on what Tobias and their daughter's life looked like after that. But I think that Brett Williams' text, Debt for Sale, gives us a little bit of an idea of what that probably looked like. So, trying to cushion the shock of my husband's death, I used credit cards to make sure my children would not be materially deprived on top of their grief. So, although this wasn't directly in the film, I think that we can kind of guess that this would most likely be Tobias's reality, and having now that he's individually responsible for the maintenance of their house, their childcare, and just the costs associated with the death of a spouse, we would probably expect that he would take on a substantial amount of debt. So through all of this, um, I'm thinking about like what is really the limiting resource in these people's lives. So the movie would like us to believe that it's time, that nothing else is limiting them in any way, shape, or form. It's not money, it's not love, it's not connection, or even human rights. But really, like, how accurate is this illustration of life under capitalism? So, yeah, I mean, if this movie were accurate, we would definitely see more of an emphasis on finances and the stressors of everyday life. Of course, like the film was meant to be more of a reflection and commentary on life's challenges and what matters at the end of one's life. Um, but I thought that was just an interesting thing to think about, just the accuracy and how people see themselves in media and stuff like that. And then, like I mentioned before, the film takes place in the UK. So looking at this in comparison to the United States, I think is important. So, like I mentioned, the UK's healthcare system is called the National Health Service, is largely universal, and citizens can choose to privatize or seek extra care at additional cost. But yeah, and then just looking at that in relation to the US mixed healthcare system. And then finally, how does the history of colonialism in the UK and US influence contemporary oppression? So, um, the main characters were cis, heterosexual, white, monogamous, married, very much assimilating into this like hegemonous culture that we are socialized to think is like normal. Um, so obviously their outcome and their story would have been very, very different if they had held marginalized identities. So I'm planning on pulling that out a little bit more in my paper, but for time's sake, I'm gonna kind of cut it there for the presentation. But then finally, just looking at, um, we've been talking a lot about debt, so I was looking at the IMF reports on national debt for the two countries. And in the UK, the current account balance in US dollars is negative 99.99 billion, whereas the US is standing at around negative $948.64 billion. So obviously there's a large discrepancy there that creates kind of more severe wealth gap based on who that debt is placed on and who is held responsible. So yeah, these are my references. Thank you so much for watching. And any suggestions on how to strengthen my argument would be very much appreciated. Thank you.